My aunt always warned me about the basement. Ever since I was little, her voice would turn serious anytime I even looked toward the door. "Emily, you're never to go down there, promise me." I would nod, wide-eyed, not fully understanding why but sensing the weight behind her words. As I grew older, the warnings never changed, but my curiosity only grew stronger. The basement door was heavy, always locked, with a thick padlock that she kept the key to on a chain around her neck. I lived with my aunt from the time I was 6. My parents had left me in her care suddenly, claiming work obligations overseas that made it impossible for them to take me with them. For years, they sent letters and occasional video calls, but they never returned. My aunt became my guardian, my family, my entire world. She was kind but strict. The house itself was old, full of creaks and cold drafts, but always spotless. Every room was open to me except for the basement. Anytime I asked about it, she would only say, "It's dangerous down there, you're safe up here." And that was the end of the discussion. As a child, I accepted her words, but as a teenager, I questioned them. What could possibly be so dangerous in a basement? Mold? Old wires? I tried to dismiss my curiosity, but it gnawed at me, growing stronger with every year that passed. I noticed how my aunt would check the lock every night before bed, running her fingers over it to ensure it was secure. Sometimes I would catch her staring at the door, lost in thought, her face clouded with worry. On rare occasions, I thought I heard faint noises coming from below. Not loud, but enough to make my skin prickle. Scratching, maybe? Or faint tapping. My aunt always dismissed it as the house settling, but I wasn't so sure. My obsession with the basement reached its peak the summer I turned 17. That year, my aunt grew sick. A mysterious illness left her bedridden and weak. Doctors ran tests but found no clear cause. She grew thinner, her face pale, and her once bright eyes dulled with exhaustion. I took over caring for her, cooking, cleaning, and managing the house. As I did, my proximity to the basement only increased my curiosity. Late at night while the house was silent, I would find myself standing in front of the door, staring at the lock. I even tried to pick it once, but the lock was solid, and my skills were lacking. One evening as I brought my aunt her tea, she caught me glancing toward the basement door again. She sighed, her voice weak but firm. "Emily, you must never go down there. Please, promise me again." I promised, but my heart wasn't in it. Something about the way she looked at me made my stomach twist. Fear, but not for herself. It was like she was afraid for me. A week later, everything changed. A storm hit that knocked out the power. The house plunged into darkness, and as I fumbled for candles, I heard it, a loud crash from the basement. It wasn't the soft noises I had heard before. This was sharp, deliberate. My heart pounded. I told myself it was just something falling, but my body shook with fear. The power remained out for hours. My aunt, barely awake, didn't respond when I tried to rouse her. Panic set in. I needed answers. I needed to know what was down there. That night, with only a flashlight in hand, I made my decision. My aunt always kept her necklace on, even while sleeping. Carefully, I slipped the chain from around her neck without waking her. My hands trembled as I held the key. Standing before the basement door, I hesitated for several minutes, my breath shallow. Then with a click, I unlocked the padlock and slowly opened the door. The air that escaped was damp and stale. The wooden steps creaked beneath my feet as I descended, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the thick darkness. The basement was larger than I imagined, filled with old furniture, covered boxes, and thick cobwebs that clung to my face and clothes. But as I reached the bottom, my light caught something that made my blood run cold. A second door. Steel. Reinforced. With multiple locks bolted shut, my legs nearly gave out. What was my aunt hiding behind another door? My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. The noises, the warnings, the fear in her eyes, it all led to this. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn back, I stepped closer. The keys on my aunt's necklace had several smaller ones. My hands shook as I tried them one by one, until finally the last key clicked. The heavy steel door creaked open, revealing a narrow hallway lined with shelves. Jars filled with murky liquid sat on them, their contents obscured but vaguely organic. At the far end, a dim light flickered. I moved forward slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The hallway opened into a small room, and what I saw inside shattered everything I thought I knew. The room was colder than the rest of the basement. The single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling barely illuminated what lay inside. At first glance, it looked like some kind of laboratory. Tables lined the walls, covered in strange instruments, glass containers, and stacks of notebooks filled with handwritten notes. My breath clouded in front of me as I stepped further inside, the air thick with a metallic scent that made my stomach turn. Along one wall stood several large glass tanks, each filled with a thick, murky fluid. Floating inside them were shapes that at first seemed unfamiliar. But as I focused, I realized they were animals. Or at least, they had been. Deformed, twisted versions of creatures I recognized. A rabbit with multiple eyes. A bird with 2 heads. A cat with elongated limbs. My stomach lurched as I stumbled back, struggling to keep from vomiting. This was not simple storage or forgotten belongings. This was something darker, something horrifying. I turned my attention to the notebooks, hoping to make sense of what I was seeing. The handwriting was unmistakably my aunt's. The entries dated back years, some even before I had come to live with her. She wrote of experiments, of genetic modifications, of attempts to correct nature's mistakes. It was filled with scientific jargon I barely understood. But the underlying message was clear. She had been conducting secret experiments on animals in this basement for years. My mind reeled. How could the woman who raised me, who cared for me, have hidden something like this beneath our feet? I flipped through more pages, trying to find an explanation, something that made sense. That was when I saw my name. Emily, written in bold letters across one of the pages. My hands trembled as I read the entry. It spoke of me as a subject, of experiments performed in infancy, of genetic alterations designed to enhance cognitive ability, immune response, and physical endurance. My vision blurred as the words burned into my mind. I was not just her niece. I was part of her experiment. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. My entire life had been a lie. The unexplained medical tests growing up, the strange vitamins she made me take, the strict control over my diet and routines. It all made sense now. She had been monitoring her creation, not simply raising a child. I sat there for what felt like hours, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand as tears streamed down my face. The woman I trusted, who I believed saved me from abandonment, had been using me for her twisted research. A sudden noise from above jolted me. Footsteps. My aunt's voice called down softly. "Emily, what are you doing? You weren't supposed to come down here." Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but filled with an undertone of warning. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing. I had to get out. I bolted toward the stairs, but before I reached them, she appeared at the top, her silhouette backlit by the faint light from the first floor. She held something in her hand, a syringe. "Emily, please. You don't understand. Everything I've done was to help you, to protect you." My breathing was ragged. "Protect me? You experimented on me. You lied to me my entire life." She stepped down a few stairs, her voice still soft but now pleading. "I improved you. You're special because of me. You're stronger, smarter, healthier. I gave you a life free of illness, of weakness. Don't you see?" I shook my head, backing away. "You stole my life. You made me your experiment." She paused, her expression shifting from calm to something darker. "If you leave now, everything I've worked for will be destroyed. You'll ruin everything. You owe me, Emily." My hands fumbled for anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on a heavy metal pipe resting against one of the tables. Without thinking, I grabbed it, holding it up between us. "Stay back." She took another step toward me, tightening her grip on the syringe. "I won't let you destroy this. You're not thinking clearly. The drugs help stabilize your system." My mind spun. The pills, the injections throughout my childhood, were they stabilizing something she had altered? Was I dependent on them? My pulse raced as I weighed my options. But deep down, I knew I couldn't trust her anymore. Every word was another layer of manipulation. I took a shaky breath and ran past her, swinging the pipe to keep her back. She lunged but missed, her balance faltering as I shoved past and sprinted up the stairs. My legs burned as I pushed myself harder than I ever had before. I reached the front door, threw it open, and ran into the night, the cold air burning my lungs. I didn't stop. I ran through the neighborhood, barefoot and shaking, until I reached a neighbor's house. I pounded on the door until they answered, their eyes wide with confusion and concern. "Call the police, please." My voice was hoarse, my body trembling. Within minutes, sirens filled the air. Officers arrived, quickly restraining my aunt as she tried to explain herself in a calm, almost robotic tone. She spoke of science, of advancements, of sacrifices made for progress. But the officers were unmoved. They escorted her into a patrol car, her expression still eerily serene. I sat wrapped in a blanket on the neighbor's porch, my mind racing, trying to process the nightmare I had just escaped. The hours following my aunt's arrest were a blur of flashing lights, urgent voices, and endless questions. Officers swarmed the house, securing the basement and documenting every inch of what they found. Crime scene investigators entered carrying equipment, their faces hard and focused as they carefully cataloged the horrors hidden beneath the house. I sat in the back of an ambulance, a paramedic checking my vitals as I stared blankly into the distance. My mind was still spinning, trying to reconcile the woman who raised me with the monster uncovered that night. A kind-faced detective named Sergeant Miller approached, crouching to meet my eye level. "Emily, you're safe now," he said gently. "We're going to take you somewhere safe tonight." I nodded numbly, unable to find words. They brought me to a temporary shelter for minors while they sorted through the legal nightmare that was unfolding. The staff there was kind, offering me warm food, clean clothes, and a quiet room to rest. But sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those tanks, those jars, those twisted creatures my aunt had experimented on. And worse, I saw her face, smiling as she calmly justified everything she had done. The next morning, the real interviews began. Child Protective Services assigned me a social worker named Ms. Bennett, who spoke with a gentle, steady voice that somehow calmed my frayed nerves. We met in a quiet room where she carefully explained what was happening. "Your aunt is being charged with multiple counts of illegal human experimentation, animal cruelty, child endangerment, and numerous violations of medical and ethical laws." She paused, her expression softening. "The evidence is overwhelming, Emily. You're safe." She repeated those words often, but they still felt distant, like they belonged to someone else's story. Over the next few days, more pieces of my life unraveled. Investigators discovered that my parents had never actually left for work overseas. They had been reported missing years ago, their case cold and buried under forged documents my aunt had provided. My stomach dropped as I processed the implication. My aunt hadn't just experimented on me. She had likely eliminated anyone who could stop her. Although no bodies had been found yet, the authorities treated my parents' disappearance as a probable homicide connected to her crimes. The idea that my aunt, the woman who tucked me into bed at night, who read me stories, who made my favorite meals, was capable of such horror made me physically ill. The media caught wind of the story quickly. News fans lined the street outside the shelter, reporters desperate for any piece of information they could get. The headlines were brutal. Niece escapes secret basement lab. Illegal experiments exposed. The coverage turned my life into a spectacle I wasn't ready to face. Ms. Bennett did everything she could to shield me from the worst of it, limiting my exposure to the news, handling reporters, and keeping my location confidential. Meanwhile, legal proceedings moved swiftly due to the overwhelming evidence. The investigators unearthed years' worth of files, video recordings, and financial records documenting my aunt's experiments and her obsessive control over my development. Medical experts analyzed my health records and confirmed significant genetic modifications present in my DNA, alterations that defied anything legally or ethically acceptable. I underwent extensive medical evaluations to assess any long-term effects from the experiments. The doctors were stunned by what they found. My immune system was stronger than average, my metabolism slightly accelerated, and my cognitive functions measured unusually high. But with these enhancements came risks. Unforeseen genetic complications could surface later in life due to the unapproved nature of the modifications. The doctors monitored me closely, creating a long-term care plan to manage any issues that might arise. Throughout it all, I felt like a specimen instead of a person, my entire existence reduced to test results and case files. The truth of what I was and how I came to be haunted me. But beneath that fear, a new emotion stirred. Anger. My aunt had stolen my parents, my childhood, my autonomy. She had turned me into her experiment without my knowledge or consent. And now the world knew me as the girl from the basement. My identity had been twisted into a headline. But I refused to let her define me any longer. After weeks of investigation, the court scheduled my aunt's trial. Ms. Bennett and the prosecutors prepared me for my testimony, explaining how important my voice would be in securing a conviction. The idea of facing her again filled me with dread, but I knew I had to do it. I couldn't let her escape justice. The day of the trial arrived. The courtroom buzzed with reporters, legal teams, and strangers who had followed the case closely. My aunt sat at the defense table, calm as ever, wearing the same eerie smile she had the night I escaped. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand, my legs shaking, but my resolve firm. The prosecutor guided me gently through my testimony. I spoke about the years living under her control, the forbidden basement, the strange medical routines, and the night I finally discovered the truth. My voice trembled at first, but grew steadier with each word. I described the tanks, the animals, the journals, and the files with my name written across them. Every detail was a piece of the nightmare I had lived. The defense tried to argue that my aunt had been acting in my best interest, that she had only sought to give me a better life through scientific advancement. But the evidence spoke louder. The illegal labs, the forged documents, and the missing persons files all painted a damning picture. When it was my aunt's turn to speak, she addressed the court with unsettling calm. She spoke of progress, of pushing boundaries for the greater good, of sacrifices necessary for advancement. She showed no remorse, no acknowledgement of the pain she had inflicted. The judge listened silently, his expression hard and unreadable. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only a short time, guilty on all counts. As the verdict was read, my aunt remained composed, her smile never fading. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict closed one chapter of my life, but the weight of everything I had discovered still hung over me. My aunt was behind bars, her experiments exposed, but the consequences of her actions continued to follow me everywhere I went. The media frenzy quieted after the sentencing, but the damage was already done. My name had become public, my face recognizable. The girl from the basement, the experiment. The headlines never called me Emily. They called me what my aunt had made me. For weeks after the trial, I remained in protective care under the supervision of Child Protective Services. Ms. Bennett worked tirelessly to help me transition into something resembling a normal life. But normal was a word that no longer held meaning for me. I wasn't sure if it ever had. Slowly, distant relatives began to surface, some offering support, others curious about the inheritance left behind in the wake of my aunt's arrest. The house, now considered a crime scene, was seized by the state. The authorities continued their investigation, dismantling every part of my aunt's operation and searching for any remaining evidence connected to my parents. Though nothing definitive had been found, investigators believed that my parents had likely been among her first victims, silenced to make room for her twisted plans. Their absence was a hole I couldn't fill, a grief that had been hidden behind lies for so long that now it felt distant and surreal. Miss Bennett eventually located a distant cousin named Sarah. She lived several states away and had no connection to my aunt or her work. After numerous evaluations and interviews, the court approved her as my new legal guardian. Sarah welcomed me into her home with open arms, treating me not as a project or a news story, but simply as family. Her home was warm, filled with laughter, music, and life. It was a stark contrast to the cold precision of my aunt's house. At first, it felt overwhelming. I didn't know how to handle kindness without expectation, affection without manipulation. But Sarah was patient. She allowed me space when I needed it, never pressing for details I wasn't ready to share. She respected my boundaries, giving me control over my own choices for the first time in my life. In her home, I began to discover who I was beyond my aunt's experiments. Therapy continued regularly, helping me untangle the trauma and confusion that lingered inside me. My therapist, Dr. Carter, specialized in complex trauma cases. She guided me through the emotional landmines that surfaced unexpectedly, teaching me how to recognize the triggers planted by my aunt's years of control. One of the hardest parts was confronting the fear that I was not entirely normal. The medical evaluations confirmed that my body had been altered. My strength, my resilience, my heightened cognitive abilities, they were all real. But they weren't who I was. They were side effects of choices I never agreed to. Dr. Carter reminded me constantly that my identity was not limited to my genetics or my aunt's experiments. I was not defined by what was done to me. I was defined by what I chose to become. School became a new challenge. Enrolling in a new high school meant starting over. But news of my story had traveled far. Whispers followed me in the hallways. Some students stared. Others avoided me entirely, unsure of how to approach the girl from the headlines. But a few reached out, offering genuine friendship without judgment. One of those friends was a girl named Lily. She never asked questions about my past, never brought up the trial or my aunt. Instead, she invited me to sit with her at lunch, introduced me to her friends, and made me feel welcome. With her, I found moments of normalcy. We studied together, laughed over silly movies, and shared secrets like ordinary teenagers. Slowly, I allowed myself to trust her. She helped ground me, reminding me that I was more than the nightmare I had escaped. My academic performance excelled quickly. The same cognitive enhancements my aunt had engineered gave me an edge in school, allowing me to grasp complex subjects with ease. But I worked hard, determined not to let my abilities become the only reason for my success. I wanted to earn my place, to build my life through effort, not through stolen science. As the months turned into a year, I found myself growing stronger emotionally. The nightmares came less frequently. The panic attacks that once gripped me without warning became rare. The darkness my aunt had cast over my life slowly lifted as I embraced the future I was creating for myself. One afternoon, Dr. Carter suggested something that at first terrified me. She recommended I speak at a youth advocacy conference, sharing my story to help others understand the dangers of hidden abuse and the importance of intervention. The idea of standing in front of strangers, exposing my past so publicly again, made my stomach churn. But as I thought about it, I realized how many other children might be trapped in situations like mine, too afraid to speak out, too controlled to even recognize their own captivity. If my story could give them hope, give them a voice, then maybe it was worth it. The conference hall was large, filled with educators, social workers, and survivors. As I stepped onto the stage, my hands trembled. But as I looked into the crowd, I saw faces full of compassion, not judgment. I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told them about the years of control, the hidden experiments, the basement, the lies, and the eventual escape. I spoke about the importance of vigilance, about the signs my teachers had missed, and the crucial role Mrs. Henderson played when she finally saw through the facade. I spoke about resilience, about reclaiming my identity, and about refusing to be defined by what was done to me. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. People approached me afterward, thanking me for my courage, sharing their own stories of survival, and offering words of support that filled my heart with warmth. In that moment, I felt a new kind of freedom. My story was no longer a chain dragging behind me. It was a torch lighting the way forward. The conference became a turning point in my healing. Not because it erased the past, but because it transformed it. My story was no longer something to hide from or fear. It had become something I owned, something I controlled. After that day, I was invited to speak at other events, panels, and workshops focused on trauma recovery and child protection. Each time, my voice grew stronger. The more I shared, the less power my aunt's legacy held over me. Sarah remained my strongest supporter, attending every event she could, always there with a reassuring smile and words of encouragement. Lily, too, continued to be my rock at school, keeping my feet planted firmly in the world of everyday teenage life. We studied together, went to movies, and even joined the art club where I discovered a passion for painting. Through art, I found a different kind of therapy, a way to express the emotions that still sometimes tangled inside me. The canvases captured pieces of my journey, from the darkness of the basement to the light of my newfound freedom. My paintings began attracting attention at local galleries. One exhibit, titled Reclaimed, featured my work alongside pieces from other trauma survivors. Seeing my art displayed, watched by strangers who connected with the pain and hope behind each brushstroke, filled me with a quiet pride. This was my voice too, just as powerful as the speeches I gave. Meanwhile, the legal aftermath of my aunt's actions continued to ripple. As investigators dug deeper into her research, they uncovered files indicating she had corresponded with others who shared her dangerous interests. Underground networks of unethical scientists seeking to push the boundaries of genetic manipulation had been quietly trading data, ideas, and resources. The authorities dismantled as much of the network as they could, but it was a stark reminder of how deeply these kinds of horrors could hide beneath the surface of society. Despite the exposure, I lived with the unsettling knowledge that others like my aunt existed, still out there, still experimenting on those who could not consent or fight back. My experiences led me to pursue studies in law and bioethics, determined to one day join the fight against unethical science and child exploitation. I wanted to make sure no one else would endure what I had. Every class I took, every paper I wrote, felt like another weapon in that fight. Dr. Carter continued to guide me through the lingering psychological wounds. Although the nightmares were rare now, they never fully vanished. There were still days when the weight of my past pressed down, when I questioned who I would have been if my aunt had simply raised me as a niece instead of a test subject. But those days were becoming fewer, and their grip was weakening. One evening, while sorting through old documents Sarah had collected from my case files, I found something that stopped me cold. A letter my father had written shortly before his disappearance. The handwriting was unmistakable, the words filled with love and desperation. He wrote of his growing suspicions about my aunt, of his plans to fight for custody, and of his fear that she might do something drastic to prevent him from taking me away. He promised he would never stop trying to save me. My hands shook as I read his final words, tears streaming down my face. Though I never knew him, his love for me was undeniable. He had fought for me, even as my aunt worked to erase his existence. Sarah sat beside me quietly, letting me cry, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. "You were always loved, Emily," she whispered. "Never forget that." Those words carried me through the next stages of my journey. As I graduated high school with honors, I looked into the crowd during the ceremony and saw Sarah, Lily, Dr. Carter, and even Mrs. Henderson, who had flown in for the occasion. They were my family, my chosen circle of support, and their presence reminded me of how far I had come. In my speech as class valedictorian, I chose to address resilience. I spoke not of my past directly, but of the strength we all carry to overcome adversity, to reclaim our stories, and to build futures that defy the darkness behind us. The applause that followed was thunderous, but what mattered most were the faces of those who had walked this road with me. College brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. I majored in law with a concentration in bioethics, driven by a fire that never dimmed. My professors quickly recognized my passion, encouraging me to intern with organizations dedicated to preventing unethical scientific research and protecting vulnerable populations from exploitation. Each case I worked on fueled my determination. I knew I could make a real difference, not just because of my education, but because I had lived the very nightmare I was now fighting to prevent. My unique perspective gave me a voice that people listened to. News outlets occasionally reached out for interviews, eager to revisit my story as I grew older. This time, I controlled the narrative. I chose which interviews to give, which parts of my story to share, and always framed it around the importance of safeguarding ethics in science and the rights of children everywhere. My aunt's name faded from headlines over time, buried beneath new stories, but my mission never faltered. The work was often heavy, forcing me to confront echoes of my past regularly, but I never allowed it to consume me again. Instead, I channeled every painful memory into fuel for my advocacy. As the years passed, I found love unexpectedly. A fellow law student named Matthew, who respected my boundaries, listened without judgment, and supported my mission wholeheartedly. We built a partnership rooted in trust and mutual purpose. He never saw me as fragile, but as fierce, someone who had turned unimaginable pain into unwavering strength. When we married, it was a quiet ceremony surrounded by those who had stood with me from the beginning. Sarah walked me down the aisle. Lily stood by my side as my maid of honor. Dr. Carter and Mrs. Henderson sat in the front row, tears of pride and joy in their eyes. It was a moment of profound healing, a celebration not just of love but of survival, resilience, and the family I had created out of the ashes of my past. The years continued to unfold with a kind of peace I had once believed was impossible. My work in law and bioethics grew, leading me to roles where I could influence real change. I consulted with lawmakers, testified before committees, and helped draft legislation aimed at closing the loopholes my aunt and others like her had once exploited. Each bill passed felt like another brick laid in the wall that would protect future children from the horrors I had endured. The organizations I partnered with expanded their reach, providing better oversight for scientific research and stronger protections for minors in questionable custody situations. I watched as the system slowly shifted, knowing that while the fight was far from over, progress was being made, and I had helped make it happen. My personal life flourished alongside my career. Matthew remained my unwavering partner, always supporting my work and celebrating every victory, no matter how small. We built a home together filled with laughter and warmth, the kind of home I once feared I would never know. The house was bright and open, filled with art and books, with a small garden I tended in the evenings to clear my mind after long days in courtrooms and offices. In time, Matthew and I welcomed our first child into the world. Holding my daughter for the first time was overwhelming in ways I had not anticipated. As I stared into her tiny face, I felt the full weight of everything I had survived pressed gently against me, not as a burden but as a reminder. She would never know the kind of pain I had lived. She would grow up in safety, surrounded by love, never manipulated or used as a project. I made a silent promise as I held her, vowing to protect her fiercely and to give her the freedom I had once been denied. Watching Matthew become a father only deepened my gratitude for the life we had built. He was patient, kind, and attentive, the kind of man who would always put his family first. Our daughter thrived under his gentle care, growing into a vibrant, curious child with his bright eyes and my stubborn determination. Sarah remained a constant presence in our lives, now fully embraced as my true mother figure. She doted on her granddaughter, filling our home with the kind of simple, unconditional love that I had craved so deeply as a child. Mrs. Henderson visited often too, proudly watching as the girl she once quietly protected now stood strong, not as a victim but as a leader in her field. The bond between us remained unbreakable, a living reminder that sometimes one small act of kindness can change an entire life. Lily too stayed close, her friendship as strong as ever. We often laughed about how far we had come since high school, two teenagers who once shared secrets over cafeteria tables, now raising families and building futures neither of us could have imagined back then. Occasionally, the past would still visit me in quiet moments. A familiar sound, a dark dream, or an unexpected question from someone who had read my story would stir old memories, but they no longer held power over me. They were part of my history, but not my identity. The fear, the confusion, the isolation, all of it had been transformed into something stronger, something purposeful. I was no longer the girl from the basement. I was Emily, a mother, a wife, an advocate, and a survivor. The story of my aunt faded from public interest over time, her name becoming little more than a footnote in academic discussions about unethical research. She remained in prison, her parole repeatedly denied as she showed no remorse for her actions. In the rare updates I received, it was clear she continued to justify everything she had done as necessary, as progress, but her words no longer mattered. Her voice, once so dominant in my life, had become a distant echo I barely noticed. My focus remained on the present and the future. I continued to mentor young survivors, helping them find their own voices and paths forward. Their resilience inspired me daily, each of their victories reminding me why I continued to fight. I saw pieces of myself in them, not in their trauma, but in their strength to reclaim their lives. As my daughter grew, I told her parts of my story, carefully and age-appropriately, so she would one day understand where I had come from and why I fought so hard for others. I wanted her to see not the horror, but the hope that followed, to understand that even in the darkest moments, light can still break through. On the 10th anniversary of my escape, we held a quiet gathering at our home. Sarah, Mrs. Henderson, Lily, Matthew, and a few close friends joined us for dinner. We lit candles not to mourn, but to honor the journey we had walked together. As we sat beneath the stars that evening, my daughter curled up in my lap. I looked around at the faces that had carried me through every stage of my healing. My father's memory, though stolen by my aunt's cruelty, lived on in the love that surrounded me. His fight to protect me had not been in vain. His determination had planted the seed of resilience that had grown into everything I had become. As the night grew quiet, I closed my eyes and whispered a simple truth to myself. I had not just survived, I had built something beautiful from the wreckage, and that beauty would carry forward for generations to come.